I'm Richard Gage. I've been a practicing architect for 20 years. I became interested in these collapses after hearing the startling conclusions of a reluctant 9/11 researcher, David Ray Griffin, on the radio in March of 2006. This has changed my life radically and launched my personal and professional quest for 9/11 truth, inspiring me to found the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. This afternoon, I'll present to you the very clear evidence that all three World Trade Center buildings, the high-rises, the iconic Twin Towers, and Building 7, were destroyed not by fire, as our government has told us, but by controlled demolition with explosives. Now, no building exhibiting all the characteristics of controlled demolition has never not been a controlled demolition.
So the official theory of the collapse is essentially a fire theory. So it cannot be overemphasized that fire has never caused large steel frame buildings to collapse. Never, whether before 9/11 or after 9/11 or on 9/11 anywhere else in the world except allegedly New York City.
Pancake theory, according to which the fires, while not melting the steel, heated it up sufficiently to cause the floors weakened by the airplane strikes to break loose from the steel columns, and this started a chain reaction.
So you would expect then from that theory, which is the official theory, to see a whole stack of floors piled up on top of each other and then a spindle of core columns standing too.
The core of each of the Twin Towers consisted of 47 massive steel columns. If the floors had broken loose from them, these columns would have still been sticking up into the air 1,000 feet.
The plane did not cut all those core columns.
We designed the buildings to take the impact of the Boeing 707 hitting the building at any location.
The building probably could sustain multiple impacts of jetliners.
That the plane flew straight into the building.
Through him, right. Yeah.
So you're saying that the building was actually designed to cope with a hole like that and still survive?
Yeah, it was.
If you had dropped, say, a billiard ball from the top of the World Trade Center, 110 floors up there, it would have taken 8 to 10 seconds to hit the ground, encountering no resistance whatsoever.
The Twin Towers came down in nearly free fall speed. 200,000 tons of steel shatters and explodes outwards over 500 feet.
This means that floors shattered at an average rate of about 10 floors per second.
There is no scenario for a pancake effect of buildings falling that allows them to fall at the rate of free fall.
Now what can do that? What can move mass out of the way? Explosives. "47 huge steel columns going up the core. They're interconnected. How do you get simultaneously so the core disappeared? It looks like those core columns were cut.
The way we do this is by cutting the beam at an angle.
I started looking at the molten metal. All three buildings, both towers in the rubble, in the basement areas, and Building 7, there's these pools of molten metal.
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails, like you're in a foundry. Like lava from a volcano.
The molten steel was found 3, 4, and 5 weeks later, when the rubble was being removed. He said that molten steel was also found underneath World Trade Center 7.
So I'm looking through the official reports. What do they say about the molten metal? They say nothing. Now, wait a minute. This is important evidence. So where did that come from? Thermite is so hot that it'll just cut through steel, through structural steel, for example, like a knife through butter. The products are molten iron and aluminum oxide, which goes off primarily as a dust. You know those enormous dust clouds? You can imagine when you assemble these chemicals on a large scale. Molten metal pools under both towers after they collapsed, and Building 7. Now, Building 7 wasn't even hit by a jet.
Part of the problem is that most people simply don't know much about Building 7 due to the extraordinary secrecy surrounding this collapse.
And this was a 47-story skyscraper. This building fell at 5:25.
It was not hit by a plane. This building had fires on only 2 or 3 floors.
And it was brought down by what we know was a controlled demolition.
Demolitions, they look just like that. You know, a kink in the middle, and then that building just comes straight down, almost at free fall speed.
They first blow one of the central columns so the building falls in on itself. Building 7 had a classic crimp, or wedge. Its central column was blown out first, so it didn't structurally damage buildings just a few feet away from it.
Initially, you had news reports saying, well, this was the plane, the jet fuel melted the steel, and somehow that steel then ends up in a pool. Well, first of all, that won't explain Building 7, which wasn't hit by a plane. Yeah, no plane, no jet fuel. Okay, so where'd the molten metal come from? These fires, it doesn't matter if it's diesel fuel, office materials, including paper, or jet fuel, they aren't hot enough to melt steel, these structural steel beams. To melt it requires approximately 1530 centigrade, about 2800 Fahrenheit. You can't heat the steel long enough with these fires to melt it.
How and when does steel melt? Steel melts at temperatures of 2750 degrees Fahrenheit and above, attained only in a blast furnace or when a powerful incendiary such as thermite is used. Steel or any substance that is burned will never become hotter than the temperature of the fire or heat applied to it. You can fire up your gas stove all day long, making soup, roasting a duck, or simmering a stew. Made of steel, your stove will not melt, and nor will your pots and pans. This is a kerosene heater designed for use in any ordinary house. The heater runs on jet-grade kerosene contained in this tank. Made of steel, the heater can operate all night and all day. The kerosene fumes ignite and burn inside it, never causing even the smallest part of this heater to weaken or melt. Yet we were led to believe that these tremendous buildings, framed in steel and surfaced in aluminum, totally collapsed from small scattered fires and 90 minutes of smoke.
All 3 buildings, both towers in the rubble, in the basement areas, and Building 7, there's these pools of molten metal.
This is how it's been since day one. Oh, it's unbelievable. And this is 6 weeks later, almost 6 weeks later. And as we get closer to the center of this, it gets hotter and hotter. It's probably 1500 degrees. We've had some small windows into what we thought was the core at some point, and it looked like an oven. You know, it was just roaring inside. And it's just a bright reddish orange color. See that stuff he's pulling out? What was that, Chief? We're gonna hold off on the water. See the stuff he's pulling out? Yeah. It's red hot. If we hit it too much steam, you won't be able to see what he's doing. Great.
So I'm looking through the official reports. What do they say about the molten metal?